The CEO Roundtable brings together operations professionals at the top of their game to define and explore what it means to be highly effective in a scale-up organization. And what sits at the heart of it is highly curated peer-to-peer roundtables where CEOs talk about things that matter.
I absolutely love my roundtable. We've been together for about 2 years, and without exaggeration, I have made friends for life.
To find out more, go to ceoroundtable.com. That's ceoroundtable.com. Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of The Operations Room, a podcast for COOs. I am Brandon Minsinger, joined by my lovely co-host, Bethany Ayers. How are things going, Bethany?
You guys say they're going well. I have lots of panic, but I'm really excited. I'm not quite sure. Like all of the above.
Wow, tremendous range of emotions going on here.
So my oldest is going to a boarding school, and my youngest is joining in September. And so we got the letter for the fees for next year. And they went up 6%, which is kind of standard, painful. But in my mind, I had not noticed last year's increase. So in my mind, it's basically gone up by 10K times 2. So it's one of those where you're like, oh my God, shit. It focuses the mind, let's say, that come September, I need to be properly earning more than I am today.
Right. To offset life's increases.
Yeah, to offset life's considerable increases. And so it's made me try and think about, like, what do I want to do? And I am still not wanting a full-time job. Life would be a lot easier with a full-time job, but then life would be a lot less fun and I would have a lot less free time. I'm still holding out and looking at occasional CEO roles just because it might be interesting if I'm aligned with my values. Because, I've learned when it's not aligned, not necessarily with my values, but my interests, it's something that I don't want to do. So if there's one that does interest me, I'm not saying never, but I'm also not actively looking for it. So what I've decided to do to increase my income is secure one more board seat. So if anybody's looking for an amazing NED or board advisor, get in touch. And then the other thing is to finally embrace growing my coaching business and starting to create some courses and workbooks. Pre-planned content. You know how much I pre-plan things. Ooh, that's actually a great segue for today, and I didn't even realize it.
All right. So we have got a great topic today, which is the life-ruining power of routines. We have the guest for this, the man that has written the article on this in the Financial Times. His name is Markham Heid, and he will be our guest. So with his thesis and with his article that he wrote in the Financial Times, all around this idea of habits do not lead to personal optimization. They lead to suffering. And he really talked about this Truman effect in our lives where we're so habitual and routine in what we do that we have the same thoughts at the same time, talking about the same things with the same people over and over again. And there's just this vague feeling that something is off and that we're following scripts in our lives. And I think we all recognize and know that with routine comes an artifact alongside of that, which is all routine is forgettable. So I'll just pause there for a moment and maybe just throw it to Bethany at the outset here. What do you make of all this?
This one really, the title caught my fancy and I read it and I loved it because I am just not a routine person. I'd say it made me feel less guilty for not being a routine person. And I was like, look, I'm not bad. I don't like atomic habits. Fuck all of your, if you want to go to the gym, just wake up every day to start going to the gym. Just do one sit up. And then before you know it, I don't like that. I'm either in it or I'm out of it. And I really like spontaneity. And so I read this and I was just like, he was speaking to my soul.
It makes you think and rethink what you're actually doing, because if you just reflect on the two of us as individuals, we're dramatically different, which is I very much am a believer in routines to help build building blocks for productivity in my life. Things that I consider to be boring, that just need to get done, that are like rinse and repeat. I want to package those things and have them very habitual, very routine. So I don't need to spend my mental capacity, my creativity, my original thought on stuff that doesn't matter. I want to get it done out of the way and not think about it. So therefore it becomes a behavior habitually in that way. And then I save my capacity, as it were, for things that are actually interesting to me, which tends to be, in the daytime at least, Monday through Friday, business problems, which were fascinating and interesting, that, kind of stimulated a lot of new thoughts and so on. So that's the way that I've lived my life for a long time. And I think as you get older, you start to, I don't know if it's just like age or being a parent or the combination of the two, or your molecular structure of your mind changes or something. But, I've definitely become one of those people now where Monday through Friday, I am up at 4:15. I am at the gym at just before 5, just after 6. I'm back home about quarter after. I've got breakfast, wake up with the kids at 6:30, and I'm in bed by 8:30 p.m.
So I'm also one who wants to outsource, automate, and mostly eliminate the things that are boring and mundane and anything that takes a lot of mental load. And actually, this is one of the things I'd like to explore for the coaching and the courses and the content to share is, can we automate a huge amount of women's mental load in the house? And I'd like to start to figure out ways of doing that, because I feel like AI, because it's all with men, are not thinking about, can we automate the dental appointments? Can we automate the remembering to buy shoes? Can we and there's just like a lot of boring shit that we could get rid of some way. But my response to that isn't to create a routine out of it. It's to eliminate it if I can.
Yeah, that's better.
And then also, so you go to the gym not every morning.
Not every morning, Monday through Thursday, because Thursday's date night, which means that I can't get up that early on the Friday.
Whereas, as you know, I do my EMS, which is 4 hours of the gym in 20 minutes once a week. And I walk because I'm in London, and I get dragged out for a run by my child once or twice a week whenever he can drag me out. And I'll do some embodiment movement whenever I feel like it. And at the end of the day, I lay on the ground for a while and help my back stretch. But I don't do the same thing every day, ever. And then where this is not necessarily the same, but I fight a lot of structure. And if I had to have structure ahead of time, like even just talking about it makes my stomach like tighten, and I feel slightly crushed. And I always thought I was a really structured person. But as I've gotten older, I've realized maybe that's why I'm so anti it now and so allergic to structure, as I spent so much of my life trying to do routine and trying to have the structure and follow the rules and be a good girl, that now I'm just like, no.
I've now been in London for quite some time, in this kind of family format for quite some time, working in SaaS companies for quite some time. There's been routine built for very specific purposes to enable my life, as it were. And I think what I've recognized over time is that I've lived in different places for different jobs historically. And in my mind, from like a novelty standpoint or spontaneity standpoint, or kind of like an imprint to my psyche point of view, I categorize my life by the chunks of time I've spent in different countries with different jobs. And they're almost like different lives that I've lived. Whereas now I've lived this particular life for quite some time. Previously, when I was young and single, you could just like say, I need something different. Therefore, I'm going to move now to, I don't know, some random country, get a new job and live a new life again. That's no longer possible. So I think the question that I'm asking, I think, is that as an adult with a family where that previous singledom is no longer possible, what is it that we can do now to give ourselves a sense of that feeling that I had previously, where you can create novelty within your life that you currently have in a way that is meaningful and satisfying, that answers this question that he's driving at here of not living a Truman-esque life, but actually having richness and meaningfulness in your life that you've actually set up for yourself. What is the answer to that?
Well, so I think it's interesting because we're in very different stages of our lives. So my kids are now in secondary school. I have freedom again. There is a certain element of needing that routine, and kids like routine, and it makes them feel safe. And it is a season of your life. The season is one of routine and monotony, and it gets better. When I had a 2-month-old and a 2-year-old and had just started at New Voice Media and was totally exhausted, I was standing in the queue with a friend waiting for a coffee, and was like, I just can't do this anymore. This can't be life. And she said that they'd done research or looked at the happiness of women in the world. And the most unhappy women, corrected for social economic reasons, location, were women who had children under the age of 5 globally. That is just the absolutely unhappiest moment of your life, is those 5 years. And it gets better.
So if you had to give a recommendation, forgetting about the family situation for myself in this case, but for something like Markham, where there really is like a rich routine built into somebody's life and they're feeling that midlife melancholy, that there should be something more interesting out there. And clearly in his article, he's referencing very small changes that he's making. What would you tell that person from your point of view?
All things moderation is better than being on either spectrum. And I suspect I have more structure in my life than I realize. But what has really changed for me is following interest and energy and creating a life that is unstructured enough to be able to do what I want or create when I'm inspired, rather than having the inspiration but not being able to do it because it's gym time. And so it's about tapping in to your energy, your interest, your curiosity, and enabling the ability to act on it when you can, combined with sometimes needing a bit of structure, because I don't want to make TikTok videos. I want to make TikTok videos, but I don't want to make TikTok videos because it scares me. I'm going to be stupid. It's ridiculous, but I really want to. And so I know that what I'm going to end up having to do is create a routine where for the first month, I force myself to make TikTok videos at a certain point every day without excuse, so that I can't make up an excuse why I won't do it. But then once I'm not afraid anymore, I don't need the routine to find the inspiration to then create.
So then how do you put yourself in a position where you can recognize how you feel about what's inspiring you, what gives you joy? Because oftentimes you're kind of caught up in your day-to-day life and your day-to-day routine. So you almost like, this has to get done, that has to get done. I've been inspired by something I've seen, but whatever, I need to move on and do X in this case. How do you pause, take advantage of that, and put that routine to the side for a moment and actually take advantage of something that you've experienced or felt?
One is get into your body. So go listen to our emotional literacy podcast and talk about, sensing in your body. So you even know that you're having those responses and you notice that you're interested, or there's curiosity, there's life force. And then the other part is, are you busy because it feels good and is a distraction, or are you busy because it's actually necessary? And I suspect a lot of time it's busy because it feels good and is a distraction. But is it important? Is it urgent? Or can you eliminate it or delay it to create space to do the thing that you actually want to do?
So we have this conversation around routine and spontaneity. How does this relate to the business context?
I think this is always the recurring meetings versus not recurring meetings. So there are, and that cadence. And I do think there is the point of recurring meetings, particularly for the leadership team. You need to bond, you need to have trust, you need to have those hard conversations. And you only do that through time and commitment and showing up regularly. Communicating with the business, again, it's important. Have your all hands, your monthly team meetings, your quarterly team meetings. And those are structures that are required because you need to share information and you need to bond as teams. But then there are so many other meetings that sneak in as recurring meetings. And often those are, maybe they should really be a recurring meeting for 4 weeks while you're doing a project and then it's done. Or you need to solve a problem and then it's done. But yet they just end up being there. And I think they become the I'm busy and it feels good and I don't have to think about what I should do next because I have to go to the fortnightly pre-sales meeting. But really, it's not necessary. And so it's about going back and figuring out which of your recurring meetings matter and which ones just feel good.
Oftentimes in companies, you have to structure things because you need to coordinate a 200-person company around particular objectives that need to get solved for the business or challenges that you're having. On the flip side of it, at a company I used to work for, we used to have an entire week set aside every 6 months where the entire company would get together in self-formulated teams to do innovative things, as it were. So it's called Innovation Week. And it could be anything. It could be like knitting a bear, or it could be like something company-wise in terms of a product variation or something like that. And what came out of those Innovation Weeks was fascinating. Like, you had very smart people doing very interesting things. It was just really a phenomenal way to kind of tap into original creative thought. We had one individual where he decided by himself, literally, to solve the problem of languages that are going extinct using our software, where he would try to capture whatever language had been put on paper related to that particular language, capture it, pull it into a machine learning algorithm, and produce a language model as part of our software that effectively preserved their language forever. He did it because he wanted to. He did it because it was spontaneous. He did it because he felt it was a purpose behind it. It made me reflect on that company, that culture, that put that person in a position where they felt that they had the time and capacity to do something that was pretty awesome.
I'd love the idea of an innovation week, because so often you have the last 4 hours on a Friday afternoon is your time to explore and learn and be innovative on your own. And that just doesn't work because people are tired. It's Friday. And you also just can't, to my earlier point, like, inspiration strikes when it strikes. Chances are it's not going to strike between 3 and 5 on a Friday afternoon, versus like giving a whole week and a lot of space to it and everybody being involved sounds awesome. We used to do one at New Voice Media. It was like Ship It Days. And I think it was quarterly, and it was 2 days a quarter where the dev team would build stuff, but it was still quite structured. It was still around like tech debt or product features versus just the innovation of doing anything for a week. And it just sounds like it'd be tremendous amounts of fun. It's interesting that it didn't work in any other company. I'm guessing it's CEOs who didn't buy into it.
Completely. This was driven by, in that original company, by the CTO, who was a founder. So he believed in it passionately, and therefore the company believed. As an operations professional, I tried to replicate it in other companies, and I could not pull it off. Like, we had some variants that were reasonably successful, I guess, but nowhere near on the same scale and level that I saw at that company. You can't mandate creativity and innovation in a company. It doesn't make any sense.
Yeah, I want to be at that company. I want to be at those innovation days. It sounds amazing.
Okay, so let's go on a quick break. And when we come back, we have our conversation with Markham Heid.
And we're back. I am delighted to welcome Markham Heid to the podcast. So for anybody who hasn't read the essay yet, rather than me paraphrase it, would you like to explain what your central thesis is?
I mean, it was really a description of what I have been feeling in my own life for a while. I'm a freelance journalist, and I've been doing this for 12 years. So I've been working remotely for 12 years and have total control to shape my day however I want to. And I noticed over time, I've really become habitual in everything I do. All my habits, I would say, are good habits. I eat well, I exercise a lot. I do things that are all supportive of being productive and being healthy. But I do a lot of the same things over and over again. Like, every day is pretty much the same day for me. And over time, I found that's really started to wear on me in some subtle ways that are becoming not so subtle, like just the way I'm feeling, the way I'm thinking. I just feel restricted and closed-minded in some ways that I didn't used to feel. And I think that this is sort of a byproduct of too much routine, too much habit in my life.
So the reason why I loved your article is, one, I love a contrarian thinker. And so everybody is all about habits, 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 and more habits. And then we also are COOs. And so we think routine, standardization, and getting everything in our lives as predictable as possible is the end goal. But fundamentally, I hate habits. I'm completely a spontaneous person, and a routine drives me crazy. And so I think I read this article and I was just like, I'm not a bad person. Look, there are reasons why I can have joy in my life and love my life and not be a slave to routine. And so I think we're probably looking at, you might have a tendency towards routine and I have a tendency for no routine. And obviously we need to be somewhere in the middle. But I would just love to understand how you realized you could think in a different way.
It's about balance. It's not like your life should be chaos and every day should be a wild new adventure and you're not doing anything the same way twice. I don't think that's true at all. But I think if you go to it like a super extreme example, like if you ate the same meal every day, even if it was the greatest thing in the world, if it was your dream meal, you get tired of that pretty quickly. And I think that can happen sort of writ large. Like habits and routines are inherently unstimulating. They're what you're accustomed to and they feel safe and comfortable. And if your goal is to be productive in certain ways, that's a great way to be more efficient and ensure that you're going to be productive in those ways you're trying to be productive. But if you're trying to be productive in maybe unconventional ways, like if you need to be creative, if you need to think of something in a new way, habits I don't think are supportive of that. I think you need to have some variety mixed in to sort of open your mind up, open your life up to these different choices, opportunities, ways of thinking about things. We all have the experience of going on vacation or visiting a new place, and suddenly it's like we have a new perspective on some problem we had or something we were trying to work through. Personally, I found like every morning I'd be making coffee and I'd have sort of the same thoughts pop into my head. And some of these were emotions, like I'd be annoyed about something and I realized I was getting annoyed about the same thing every day. It really felt like a habit. Like I was just, the cues that I was putting myself through, the environmental stuff was the same every day. And my brain was sort of having the same thoughts, the same feelings in the same context every day. Those patterns of repetitive thinking precede a lot of mental health problems. First, you have the negative thoughts over and over and over again every day, and then depression or anxiety sort of forms around that or becomes the byproduct. It sort of felt like maybe I was building up this infrastructure of habit that could be supportive of negative thought patterns. Like I need to shake things up so that I don't have these same thoughts every day and same feelings every day in the same places.
How best should we think about this in terms of like, we need routine and structure to be productive fundamentally. That's why we do all these things, right? Especially as parents and adults and working in companies and so on. But how do we get the right balance between that and really like the freshness, the creativity, the instinctual? How do you get there?
It's going to depend on your life and where you are in life, how old you are, what you've got going on in every facet. I don't have a recipe for how to make your life have just the right balance of novelty or excitement or adventure. I think it's going to depend on the person and what they're comfortable with and also what they're feeling, where they are in life. I think kids, there's some tension there between being sort of parent aged and having a career where you may have been doing the same thing for 10 or 15 years, and that can get a little bit stagnant. But your kids need a lot of routine. Like I think they need structure and routine. That's a super important part about childhood because everything is new to them and novel and they're exploring every day. But that also works both ways. Like you have a lot of structure built into your life when you have kids.
The vast majority of people want to be told how to live a happy life.
I have a problem with the word happy because every study that looks at people seeking happiness, like the more you prioritize happiness, the more miserable you tend to be. And I think we're figuring that out with a lot of mental health stuff now. Like the messaging we get telling people, this is your goal, try to attain it. I think that can really get us into trouble when we're paying a lot of attention to how we feel and deciding ahead of time that certain emotions are good and some others are bad and we need to avoid them or do something to make them go away. I think that everything we're feeling is just a way to guide our behavior. That's sort of its evolutionary purpose, is to sort of steer us into modes of living that are going to be better for us. So I think happiness is just a byproduct of what you're doing. And I also think that it's not the point of life. Like if you're really immersed in something, which I think is sort of an aspect of doing something new that's challenging for you, if you're into that, I don't think you care if you're happy or not. You're not wondering, oh, am I happy right now? It's just not. Whenever I've been really engaged with something, happiness sort of fell away and it wasn't about being happy or not. I was immersed in my life at that moment. I'm not wondering, am I happy? I don't even think I would call myself happy. I'm living. I'm alive and I'm focused on what's around me. It's sort of like a form of mindfulness. When you're doing something new, you're not paying attention to what's going on inside your head. You're paying attention to the new thing that you're engaged with. And I think that's a wonderful thing that we need and that routine doesn't give us.
I think what routine gives us and why it's so appealing is it gives us a sense of control over our lives. And I think that's what people are looking for, and why you tend towards habit is so that you do feel like you're in control. And so one of the first questions would be like, what are the habits that you can let go of?
I don't think it's like habits are bad and we need to get them out of our lives. It's more, how do we balance this or see ways where we can vary our habits that are going to be more stimulating, more interesting to us. We don't assess whether we even feel good doing these things. They become like compulsions after a while where you just do them automatically. And I see people more and more data on like media multitasking where people are looking at their phone while they're watching TV and they're listening to a podcast. I think if you find yourself becoming bored where you're having to do things like this to stay engaged, that's a sign that maybe your brain is asking for something new. Like it wants something more interesting, more engaging, more novel going on, not just more of the same.
You talk about for yourself personally, you've taken a couple steps in this direction. Can you maybe describe that? So this is not these prescriptive elements being suitable for everyone, but obviously you've thought about this quite a bit and personally you've started to address this. So what are some of the things that you've done and you've thought about?
Yeah, these are not super radical changes in my life. I'm trying to meet up with friends more for lunch and try different lunch places. I'm going to different cafes to work. I'm really trying to break up the times of day when I work because I'm so rigid about now I'm going to work from these hours to this hour to this hour. And there are times when that's not the most productive way for me to work. Like my job involves some creativity and I try to go for walks a lot more during my workday because I find when I take a 15-minute break, I come back and then I've just had newer insights, much more like creative thinking on how to tackle what I'm working on. I downloaded like a voice transcription app where I can go for a walk in the woods and I can talk and it will record what I'm saying. So I can almost speak out loud what I'm going to be working on and get some like initial notes down. And generally, I'm just trying to not do anything 2 days in a row. I mentioned in the piece, I'm working on a screenplay. I think the odds of that turning into anything are almost zero, but it's fun and it's getting me involved in something I have an interest in and I haven't never tried. It's not like when I'm working on it, I'm happy. But when I look at my life, like when I think about my life, the fact that that's in there now makes me feel happier about everything.
I have one value and my one value is fun. And this isn't something that I used to have. I had a massive career and I was super stressed and I forced routine or fell into routine. And my number one value was ambition, probably, or achieving, and have felt wildly unfulfilled from that life and realized that building businesses is not actually something that I get much fulfillment from. So a year ago, I left my job and have done a year of exploring. I'm calling it fun for shorthand. It could be joy, or it could be really that understanding of the life force and what are those things that I want to do. But in order to do that, mindfulness and an understanding of what you want is such an important part of it, because if you can't feel what brings you joy, you can't do that thing. And I feel as though a lot of routine numbs you.
I think it can numb you and also sort of take you out of contact with what you actually are feeling, like what you actually want to do. I had the experience of like, okay, now I'm going to have that glass of wine or watch Netflix. And it's like, do I even want to do this? Or am I just doing it because I'm so used to doing it? It's like a compulsion. It's like an itch I have to scratch or I don't, I'm uncomfortable. But do I really want to do this right now? If you have too much of this going on in your life, you can really lose all contact with what is actually enjoyable for you, what is making your life satisfying or fulfilling. Like there's room to move around and explore that. It's not all about becoming successful and productive. Like those are great goals and those are fine, but I would say we need to balance that. And I found this stat after I worked on the piece. The average American worker now spends something like 7 hours a day on email, just email. I don't think our lives at any point in history were ever that sort of tedious, where it was the same tasks for that much of your day every day for most people.
About 8-9 years ago, I realized that if you don't respond to emails, you don't get emails back. And so I basically stopped responding to emails except for the absolute bare minimum that I had to, because if you respond to emails, they reply. And there's very few things that actually need responses. So that's just like a top tip for anybody who wants to do less email in their life. The more I'm speaking with you, I'm kind of coming up with some different ideas of like, habit is the straw man or the thing that you noticed was where you were not getting joy. And it was, from the fact of lots of habits. And I think that might come from, it's supposed to give us happiness. It's supposed to be the unlock that will help us achieve those things that we want to achieve. And if we follow the rules, we'll feel good. And so if we follow the rules for habits, good things will happen. If we follow the expectations of our families and our educations, good things will happen. If we follow the rules in society, good things will happen. You're a bit younger than me, but I feel as though like for mine was definitely some sort of midlife, not crisis, but awakening, because it's suddenly life isn't that long. I'm still healthy and relatively young. I want to experience things. And it's caused me to question so much in my life. It almost seems like having this conversation with you now, that habits was the thing that forced you to question your life, but it's not actually habits themselves. It's the idea of living a regimented life, or the life of rules and the life that you should lead that you don't have to think about, versus having to live a life you think about is actually where the fulfillment comes from. Do you think that's a fair interpretation?
I go back to this sort of the stimulation component. Like, I think it's fundamentally boring for your brain to do the same things all the time in the same context. It can be productive and comfortable and the results are reliable, but you're just not living. When you're doing the same things, your brain is not making nearly as many memories. It's just not as active. And that, in retrospect, makes time feel like it was super flat, like nothing went on. If you go for a long weekend to like a new place, you get back and you feel like you were gone for 2 weeks. You know, it feels like a lot of time has gone by because your brain was engaged with a lot of new stuff.
I've always had this mindset of, do you remember Tim Ferriss from ages ago, his first book, The 4-Hour Workweek? I will outsource anything that I don't want to do that's routine. I'm making more money now, so it's just like I need to get rid of these low value tasks. So I will outsource all of that as much as I possibly can. And I've held true to that my entire life from reading his book. So the routine serves a purpose. Now I open myself up to high value activities that I want to do, that I want to spend time on. And I have more time to do that conceptually to make that happen. It doesn't always work out as I wanted to because of the relentlessness of life. I end up just like taking on more stuff into the routine buckets, and I end up doing more routine things. And by the time I finish my work week, I feel like I've done 80% routine in some ways, as opposed to the reverse of like having 80% of high value stuff.
I think a lot of us are sort of trained by culture to have that mindset. And a lot of us do what you describe, where once we've been more efficient and sort of created with routine, this space to do other things, we tend to fill that with more super productive or self-improvement type activities. Okay, I've got an extra 4 hours a week. I'm going to spend that going to these 2 gym classes, and that's going to make me healthier. So, and then that becomes a new routine. So it's like, instead of having more freedom in our life to sort of explore and try new things, we're just filling that extra time we're gaining from being productive or efficient with other productive and efficient habits or healthy habits. A lot of this language we're using and a lot of these concepts are sort of, you can really map them onto like entrepreneurial, like business-minded culture in the US. We're all being pushed to be productive in very specific ways. If you can measure it in terms of money and success, they're wonderful.
We've been brainwashed by people we don't even know that are out there in the world that are somehow forcing us to be as economically viable, productive units of work that we can be.
So putting together what Brandon just said, plus what you said previously around we don't remember the activities in the routine because we're just not storing those memories, that you end up with 80% of your life that you have no memory of. And I'm reminded of I had these like cards with questions on them when I was younger. So one of them was, if you could go and have the most amazing holiday in Bali and blah, 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 you know, and like palm trees and pina coladas and not remember any of it, would you still do it? And it was a question of like, what is your life? Is your life the experience, or is your life the series of experiences that you remember?
We can all imagine being 80 and being asked, what do you look back on and really, what are you really happy you did? And I don't think I glued myself to a computer for 30 years and made a lot of money. I don't think most people would mention that. They talk about places they went, relationships they had with other people.
But it's not only that we're living it that other things matter more, we're also living it in such a routine and boring way that we're not going to remember it either. So we're not actually like living for a long-term life to reflect upon, which is, I'm finding this a very scary concept at the moment. The time travel that is your life.
We're edging into like the midlife crisis conversation too here. Why do so many of us feel that? And what is that exactly? There's a lot of different hypotheses about it. But I think part of it might be this realization, yeah, we're getting older, we're going to die. And are we spending our time in the right ways? And a lot of us see that the last 2 decades have been dominated by work. And you feel like, okay, is that all it's about? Or should I be doing other things with my time?
I have to be fair to younger people who are struggling with these. And the struggles that I had is I'm only in a position to try and figure out what I want to do with my life because of how hard I've worked previously. So I think that there are lots of choices to be made. And basically, we all have to figure out what those choices are. Back to the original point of why your book won't tell people these are the 3 steps that you have to follow to have a happy life.
There just seems to be an imbalance these days between how we prioritize like the work part and the spicier kind of variety side of life and the explorative side of life, and trying new things to see if maybe that's a better way to do it, or that's something that I'm more interested in exploring.
This takes me back to a previous podcast we had done with another guest. His name was Bethany. We talked about 2 pretty simple concepts, one of which is enterprise businesses, organizations are out there where it's really just like a transaction as an employee with the employer, which is you do work and you get paid for it, and that's the deal, and that's what it is. And then there's kind of the evolving modern progressive companies where he asked a really astute question at the end of his talk, which is the employee better off for having worked for me? Is their life better off, essentially? Just thinking about this conversation right now, it makes me start thinking wild thoughts in a way around what can an organization possibly do to take Gethin's comment of what could a company possibly do to set the right conditions to allow them to have the richest, fullest life they could possibly have and to make that happen.
You see some trends toward like more company retreats, like more sort of extracurricular get-togethers or trying to mix up the ways people work or giving them flexibility to work in different ways, nap rooms, things like this. I think there's a recognition that you need to give people more freedom to sort of move around within their job, sometimes actually getting up and moving around, but more flexibility to do things in unconventional ways where you're not working unless you're sitting at your desk, answering emails immediately, answering the phone immediately if you have to. I think it would certainly benefit companies and their employees if they were aware of the tedium that might be involved in the tasks they're asking their employees to do and how they can help them break that up and even coach them on how important it is to break that up and to try to, have like creativity workshops where you're helping your people understand it's good to have some variety in how you approach your job and how you think about your work and how you execute your tasks. I think that doesn't have to be anything huge, but little changes can make a big difference.
And giving permission to not have to be at your desk the whole time. Like there's one thing to say it's a good idea to go and do it. And then another thing to be like, and where were you? You were gone for the last hour.
Even your example that you gave of walking in the forest and transcribing some notes, that's just a wonderful example of doing exactly that. Walking away from the desk, taking a long walk, having fresh thoughts. And it's actually directly related to writing a phenomenal article.
I think everyone has had the experience of like having to go to the bathroom or get a glass of water or whatever and coming back and realizing like, oh, this approach would have been much better, or I wish I'd said this, or oh, good, I can change it and incorporate this. We need those breaks to give our brains time to put pieces together. So I think there's a lot of different ways to be productive that we don't always appreciate.
If our listeners could only take one thing away from our chat today, what would that be?
I would think about what parts of your life really matter and what do you look back on and take the most gratification from, joy, satisfaction, whatever you want to call it, and think about what was really going on there and how you can bring that forward into the moment now. Because I would say it's not going to be something you did every day for 5 years. It's going to be something that was outside of your routine or your habit that made it special.
Lovely. So thank you, Markham, for joining us on the Operations Room. If you like what you hear, please subscribe or leave us a comment, and we will see you next week.